some other institutions called you might also hear a course like this also called a critical thinking course. And this is partly because we do a little bit more in a class like this than we would in a standard logic course. And what I mean by a standard logic course, the kind I had back in 1988 or 1989, something like that. This is all in my notes, by the way. It's also in the textbook. There tended to be a stronger emphasis upon what is sometimes called formal logic. The reason why we call it formal logic is because the main concern was analysis of arguments in terms of their mostly in terms of their structure. And you would spend up to 50% of the course on deduction and deductive methods. Now this definition will show up in the textbook and in my notes, but I want to say it right now. Deductive arguments or formal arguments are first and foremost analyzed for acceptability in terms of validity. This word validity will show up in the first chapter of the book. The reason I'm emphasizing it right now is because even after students have read the book and heard me lecture on it, they still frequently get the concept wrong. And I don't think it's the average student's fault. It is because of a colloquial misusage of the word valid in everyday conversation. I just had a student in one of my online discussion boards say, "That statement is valid." To which I made the noise in my head. Statements are not valid. Arguments are valid or invalid. Statements are true or false or undetermined. Please don't mess this up. Validity is not synonymous with the truth value of the premises. Validity is a measure of whether or not the argument is well structured. If an argument is well structured, and I haven't defined yet what good structures are, if an argument is well constructed, aka valid, and true premises are plugged into it, guess what you can know about the conclusion? Yeah, the conclusion will be true also. If an argument structure is valid and its premises are true, its conclusion will also be necessarily true. Now, we're going to be only spending about 2.5 to 3 weeks on this kind of formal stuff. Just enough to get you a basic sense of how it works. We're going to be spending a lot more time on, what should I say, learning about what are called informal logical fallacies. Informal logical fallacies are not errors of structure. They are more common errors of connections between premises. And what are premises? Premises are the reasons that you use to support a what? Yeah, your conclusion or your thesis. If the premises either are insufficient or irrelevant to drawing a conclusion, some kind of fallacy or other has been committed. Be it a formal fallacy or an informal fallacy. And if you don't like that word fallacy, unfortunately you'll have to get used to it. The word fallacy is really not that fancy of a concept. It simply refers to an error of reasoning. If something is fallacious, it means there is an error of some sort that takes place. If an argument is well done, that is, it doesn't have these errors, we say that it is cogent. That word, ladies and gentlemen, also shows up in chapter 1 of the textbook. Now, we are just about out of time, ladies and gentlemen. I am going to drop you an email reiteration of what I'm going to say to you right now. Your homework for today, or for next time we meet, which will be Monday, if you haven't secured the textbook yet, make sure you secure it ASAP. Do your best to give chapter 1 a nice little read-through. Do your best to understand what's going on. We will be going over the highlights of chapter 1 over the next week. So yeah, if you haven't assimilated it all before Monday, it's understandable. What I do want you to do for written homework, and this is to sort of get you to start engaging with the material, this is not a textbook question. This is a question I have formulated for you. The first thing I want you to do is construct your own example of an argument, paying heed to chapter 1's definition of an argument. And then explain why it meets the criteria of what chapter 1 defines as an argument. Now, the second thing I want you to do, and this kind of activity will be old hat to many of you. Part 2 is to do exercises 1-1 at the end of the chapter, questions 1, 2, 3, and 9. 1-1, section 1-1, actually gives you examples of short arguments. What it asks you is the following passage an argument? If so, identify the conclusion and the premise or premises. The premises, of course, are the supporting reasons. Now, what this question does not ask you to do is to analyze the argument for whether or not you think it's cogent or not. That's going to be the next step. At this point, I'd just like you to do your best to see if you can determine in these short passages, A, is there an argument there? And if so, what's the conclusion and what is the premise or what are the supporting premises? We will go over them in class on Monday. We won't go over